All right. And I believe we are live. Hopefully everyone can hear us. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to be discussing a very hot topic, but before we do, I just want to pay my acknowledgement and respect of country. I begin today acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. This event is recorded. If you want, please put your questions and comments in the chat. And as we go along, we may bring those questions up, or we'll also ask questions at the very end of the panel discussion. There are such wonderful insights that we're going to receive from Andy and Jess. And so really hearing what they have to say and then being able to ask questions at the end would be the cadence that we try to stick to today, but you never know what can happen. So let's set the scene for the session. Improving your impact and influence. It's about more than just solid strategies or excellent execution. It actually involves building those better relationships, particularly with your C-level colleagues. So exactly how do we go about doing that? We'll be chatting with today's panelists about how they've actually gone about doing that and building influence in their role and improving the partnerships across the C-suite. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Andy first to say hello and give an introduction, and then Jess.
Great, thank you, Jo. My name is Andy Steeds. I lead the talent acquisition function for Capgemini in Australia and New Zealand. And I'm joining from Woiwurrung land today, and the people of the Kulin Nation. So also want to extend acknowledgement to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who may be on the call. I've been in my role for just over 2 years now, leading the recruitment team as one of the HR directors for Capgemini in Australia and New Zealand. We're a predominantly digital transformation, technology and consulting business. And have a wide variety of stakeholders at sort of global and local executive level. So very excited to be part of this panel today and hopefully share some experiences. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I'm Jess. I'm the founder and CEO of We Are Charlotte. So I'm currently on Boonwurrung country. My pronouns are she, her. I founded the business 4 years ago, and essentially what we do is offer skilled people and talent capability to growing businesses. So our sweet spot is startups, scale-ups, and businesses that are wanting to make an impact. So naturally, a lot of our stakeholders are the business owners, the C-suite, and we're really fortunate to be able to essentially work with lots of different executives in lots of different contexts. We work across a variety of industries, many of them in sort of digital, tech and professional services. And I've got a phenomenal team that work alongside me to deliver and essentially act as the in-house people team to these clients. So really looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. Thank you both for your introductions. Now, I'm going to throw the questions to both of you. So one of you will start with answering it and then pass to the other. So anyone in HR, people and culture, TA, anyone in the leadership role knows that there are multiple goals for us to focus on, and sometimes they end up being competing. So we have, strategic visions that are set, and then we have to prioritize what needs to happen first, second, third. How have you gone about aligning your goals with the overall company's objectives?
I'm happy to go first, Jess, and then throw over to you. But it's interesting when you talk about competing priorities and my experience predominantly in larger businesses. There are so many competing priorities and layers to organizations that you can often find yourself going around in circles for a long time. And you also find the big picture company goals, whilst they're aspirational, they apply across organizations that are sometimes 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 people. So how do you filter that down to actions and operations when the strategy can be so large and broad? From the experience in the organizations that I've worked for, you just have to go and ask. You just have to go and talk and go, okay, what does this mean to us? And in the audiences and the time that you have with your leadership and executives and stakeholders, understanding what the company goals and objectives are at a bigger picture, but then also talking to your direct executives or stakeholders, perhaps in your country or region, whatever that may be, and understanding, okay, how is that translated down to you? What are your targets? What are your goals? What are your objectives? Because ultimately then a team like mine and recruitment team has to sort of digest that and align to your nearest executive in many cases. But that's just, I suppose one example and one experience, and it can be vastly different in different organizations and companies.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really good segue to Jess, because, Andy, you work for big enterprise, but Jess, I guess the last 4 years means it's more startup that you have been supporting as well, and being a startup yourself. So yeah, I'd love to hear your answer to that question as well.
Yeah, a lot of synergies to what Andy said, but one of the things that we really focus on is deeply understanding the business strategy. And it's so essential when it comes to being a people or a talent leader that you don't fall into simply just trying to deliver what is the new interesting way to deliver a people program, or the new best practice, or the newest trend. You've really got to tie it back to business strategy. And to just call a spade, we've got to solve for the problems. If you do not solve for the pain points, you can't even begin to do the proactive value add work from a people perspective. So, when you're looking at an organization and seeing what they're trying to achieve, it's really cutting down to that root cause. So, if you can see that there's all of this inefficiency at an operational or department level around the way that strategic planning is happening, what's going on? Is that there's no culture of feedback? Is that there's not an effective way in which the leadership team are operating and setting their strategy in the first place? Have you just got a really siloed organization? And it really is, the intuition of the people team, those who are speaking to the humans on the ground and figuring out what's going on and looking at the trends from why people are joining the organization, why they're staying, why they're leaving, to really understand, what are those foundational priorities to solve for. So, it's really just about making sure that there's really clear reasoning to get people on board, because as we know, unfortunately, unless the organization is really, really brought into the people and talent strategy, it can feel like a nice to have, not a critical priority. And the last thing that I just wanted to mention, which Andy touched on before as well, if you look at the true life cycle of designing, implementing, and then really seeing the value of any, large scale people or talent program, it's really long term. And I think it's really important that we break that down into really manageable steps to make it really clear to people, this is where we're headed to first, and this is what it's going to look like when we get there. And then we're going to test again to see if we need to pivot or change, because humans are unpredictable. They're always going to take longer to adapt than we want them to. And we need to be ready, to just be really responsive to that along the way. So, I think it's just about that really strong stakeholder expectation management from the get-go, because we are the specialists. We are the ones that deeply understand the why, the what, the how of a people strategy. But we can't expect others to sort of have that same level of knowledge in amongst everything else they're thinking about.
So it's really bringing the CEO's strategic vision and giving it through the lens of people, the considerations, when it comes to skill sets required. Do we have it in the business? Do we not? And then versus market conditions, being able to pivot at the same time. So I really want to go a little deeper in terms of conversations. So you've both, given an indication of, right, you've got to get your strategy right to start with. Everyone needs to be aligned on it. And then you've got to do it through the people focus. But what about the conversations internally? How did you get, for example, the CFO on board versus the CEO when they're likely to have different priorities, revenue, cost, keeping the budget a certain way, and then you've got the business saying, hey, we need this. So, versus that. What are your thoughts?
I might take that one first, if that's okay, Andy, because I just want to lead on something that Joe just mentioned earlier. I think it's essential. I see the people function as a core enablement function of strategy. And so with that in mind, it's about sitting down with any executive. And if you want to use the CFO, and I'm about to make some massive generalizations about the typical profile of a CFO, but typically they are motivated by metrics and numbers and sort of bottom line impact. So you need to speak their language. You're not going to come in and talk to them about all of the intangible benefits of a people program. You're going to talk to them about the tangible and what that actually means in measurement and what that's going to be attributed to from both a cost and also an impact perspective. It's one of the biggest challenges with people programs. We can't always just put a really clear ROI on it. It's a little bit of assumption. It's a little bit of art and science. And so by speaking their language, aligning to their priorities, and then really seeing the people and talent strategy as an enablement of whatever it is that executive is trying to do, then they see the partnership. We talk a lot about understanding profiles of executives, like do the work to figure out what makes them tick. Test and learn as you're engaging with them. Are they someone that likes a lot of information, a little bit of information? Are they direct? Are they indirect? Whatever the case may be, you've got to play around with that and be really curious. Because you've got to be respectful of their time. And if you're not going to land your message in a way that makes sense to them, it's going to be really challenging to influence.
So what you're saying there, Jess, is really know your audience, how they want to be communicated to. Is it going to be data specific for a CFO? It would be versus somebody else. That's wonderful insights. I'm going to pass now to Andy. Andy, what have you got to share about that?
I think it's okay to generalize certain executives. I think don't worry about doing that. I think we all do it. But I certainly think we live in a world where no matter what two letters you have after the C in your name, that money is important. And it's not always necessarily because, there's a greed factor behind why is it all about the money. But ultimately, organizations can only improve their people's salaries and support promotions and grow a business for the betterment of everyone if they're making profit or if they're doing well, So that return on investment is often all that matters, even when you think that this is just the right thing to do. It's good to do from a people's perspective. It's the right thing to do. It's like, yes, that's all well and good, but is the return on investment you have happier people and therefore they stay longer and therefore you don't have to pay those replacement costs? Is the return on investment we train our people up internally? It might take 6 months, but that is still better value than trying to recruit a whole load of people externally. These are all things that can improve revenue or profit or whatever you look at in terms of the key metric, but then it also does the other things at the same time in parallel. So I think that's important. And that combination of art and science, which sort of Jess spoke about, is right in that you need data and you need evidence to be able to support what you're saying, but that can sometimes be the foot in the door. Okay, you've got someone's attention because the data or the evidence that you have indicates something, but then your opportunity comes to influence is building on that with your hypothesis and going, I think based on this data, this outcome, or this is what could happen, or this is what we should do. It is a balance and it is a combination, but I think most executives in this day and age make data-driven decisions, and that's always important.
I've got a curveball question now for both of you. You can choose not to answer it. I can pass it to the audience. But just off the back of what you're saying, quite insightful. What about when the strategy has been set and you're talking about, both of you have been talking about data and making sure, versus the audience, you kind of leverage that. What if the data is changing and then the strategy needs to change? Then what?
I think that is a guaranteed reality that you have to be prepared for. And as Andy was speaking before, I was saying, I think we've also got to back ourselves to leap in with data, even if it can't fully explain the scenarios, because, as Andy sort of gave those examples before, all of those metrics are super important. But I think a lot of HR and people in the past have doubted themselves to sort of call it and say, this is the metric that will tell us how much money we save, in recruitment fees, if we, because there's that question around sort of validity and have we considered every factor. And I think the reality is, we've got to create that level of comfort around it being a dynamic strategy that's going to move and change. And actually the value in the strategy itself is about being responsive and being able to flex. So, I think it's just about, if you've got that strong rapport and you can lean into a conversation and say, from what we know today, these are the facts, but here are some things that might affect it, and making sure that data is as easy to access and monitor as possible, so that you can just be checking in and going, right, we've noticed a change here, and then being able to flag that up. So I think not putting so much pressure on perfection, and actually just using data as a reliable source to inform, but being really comfortable with the fact that, it is going to change, and that's okay. I think I reckon there's a bit of imposter syndrome in people leaders sometimes, where, we're probably only just coming to the table now with really strong data, but then it's not as robust as a P&L. So you're like, well, I don't know that I can stand by it. But I think that we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not.
Yeah. And those trends,
yeah. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because you have, the old line of, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Okay. So you can, if you take a data set at a point in time, you can make it tell whatever story you want, but it's that trend analysis often, what has changed over time. That is what actuaries and people in finance use to as best as possible, to try and predict what might happen in 3 months' time, or 6 months' time, or 12 months' time. But at the end of the day, most organizations and companies are very adept at reforecasting and looking at quarterly reviews, half-year reviews. So most organizations are, the ones that you see succeed often are able to pivot and move quickly if the market changes, or if the talent market changes. But you have to have those connection points to be able to say, right, something has changed, therefore we need to change. If you're not in the ear of the right people that you need to be talking to, or you have this information but you're not sure how to share it, that's where you can potentially run into problems, because there's lots of layering and ambiguity. So those conversations, and when you get your opportunity, and when you have your moment with your certain executive that you need to influence, you need to strike, and you need to strike well.
Right. Now, thank you both for answering that question. I've learnt a lot, and I will put that in my pocket, in my skills toolkit. What I want to now focus on, off the back of the competing priorities yet again, because that's like the essence of, the strategic vision and then it being implemented. Before I ask the question, I want to set the scene in terms of, what you were suggesting: audience, data, metrics, numbers, and making sure there is a runway for people to stay in the business. So if you think of yourself in the role of a leader, they're looking at who do we have as people in the business executing the roles that we need to drive that strategy. Are they the right people? Are we paying them the right salaries? And how much is that versus what benefits are we offering them to uplift them, to upskill them, to give them the support they need? And so with that in mind, I just wanted to ask you how you ensure, with the strategic vision, competing priorities, the audience that you have before you, how do you actually ensure you've got the best possible outcome when you're having those difficult conversations, saying, sorry, mate, I can't actually execute that particular task for you because we're focused here. So how do you build that empathy and understanding for other leaders' priorities, basically? Who wants to answer that first?
That's a difficult question, right? Because a wise person, who I won't mention his name, but he works with me at the moment, sort of said to me that the more senior you get, or the more experienced you get, sometimes in an organization, in a role, you end up having to say no sometimes more than you have to say yes. And it's not necessarily because you become a blocker, but there are so many competing priorities that understanding what is important at a given point of time is quite difficult. And often you have to make decisions, even as a talent leader, or a people leader, or as a COO, or even as a CEO, to make a decision or execute on something that disappoints some people, but might be better off for the majority. Or it might be difficult short term, but it might be better off longer term. So that is challenging, that is difficult, but that is also the day-to-day of becoming a leader, regardless of whether it's a large organization or a small one. I don't think I've answered your question. I'm sorry.
I think you kind of have, in a way, it's almost like you have to actually know the business posture, what's happening, and therefore you can have those robust conversations to say, well, actually, we're prioritizing this because this and this is happening over there. So it's keeping that balancing act right. I think that's what you're trying to address there.
To talk about the context that you were setting around things like pay and benefits and salaries and that kind of thing. Like let's talk about that now, right? Because we've seen a period of time in most industries and most markets and most economies where things have been pretty challenging. Like people have been losing jobs. There have not been pay increases. The cost of living is far outstripping the increase in salaries that most people are experiencing. So there's this real pressure and squeeze and tightness around money. And what you see in a lot of organizations is that decisions that maybe are, okay, we can't increase pay as much as we want to this year, or we can't enable bonuses as much as we want to this year, or we can't create additional benefits as much as we want to this year. But why is that happening? Often that's happening to preserve jobs. So in those instances, what is better? Increasing some people's pay, but letting more people go and having those people, knocking on Centrelink door, and so it's about that sort of what is good for some versus all. We start to get a bit political here. We start to get a bit ideology, but I think that those are the challenging conditions and circumstances that you go through. But like with a lot of economies and markets, these things are cyclical. You will find that there will come times, and there have been points throughout previous cycles where you can go, right, things are looking okay now. Let's push ahead with that priority or that agenda that we did have to park 12 months ago or 18 months ago. We can do it now. Let's strike while the iron's hot.
Okay. Thank you, Andy, for that. Jess, I would like to hear from you. We're getting through these questions, and I want to make sure we hear from both of you.
Yeah, look, everything that Andy said is so valid and important. And then I probably take it a layer below and just remind people that we've got humans in these executive roles. And I think people, the further away you are from sort of that day-to-day engagement, the quicker we are to forget that. And so at the core, when you're dealing with executives and having to tell some people we're going ahead with your strategy and we're not going ahead with yours, the first thing is, obviously to make them feel seen and heard. And I don't mean to sound overly simplistic, but, I sometimes reflect and think the way that we do business planning, does it actually set people up to fail more than succeed? Particularly at an executive level, you're given a chance maybe once, twice a year to put all of this energy into a strategy deck, and you spend all this time building this massive, pitch for the investment that you need and the growth priorities. And, for most organizations, a lot of it doesn't get approved, doesn't come to fruition. And imagine that, imagine saying, to someone, go and put all this effort into something, and then it probably actually won't come off. And so starting out by firstly acknowledging them and being like, we hear you, we see why you've put your strategy together the way that you have, and then really cutting into the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, because execs are given fewer opportunities to really go in for what they're looking for and what they need. They're going to throw everything into we all know that to be true. You throw everything into the mix and pray that the important stuff lands. So to be able to really delineate what is a must-have and what is a nice-to-have, and trying to find ways to make those must-haves happen, in a coordinated way, is really, really essential. And at the end of the day, the people leader, and this might be a slightly bold statement, but no one other than the CEO is as motivated as the people leader to foster the right behaviors, culture, and actions across the entire organization, right? Most other C-suites and leaders have got a departmental focus, but the people leader has got that organization-wide focus. And so we need to be a model for it as well. And so, some of the behavior that we see in reality is back channeling, interpersonal dynamics playing out, all of the internal politics that just inevitably happen in organizations. And so, I call to people leaders to actually be the ones that model the behavior they want to see across the organization. Have the hard conversations, say to Steve, the executive number one, I know you're really frustrated because this executive over here got this through, and I know it's something that's been a frustration point. How can I help you overcome that? And I think that we are the ones that understand the value of sort of having those brave and bold and real conversations. And so we have to model it and hold people to account to do it. So, it's just making sure that at the core of this, we understand the human behavior that's going to influence how people people act in these scenarios, and not to forget that executives are influenced by human nature as well.
So true. Both of you have said some very insightful things, and the key takeaway that I get from the essence of what you're saying is that we have to look at it from the lens of executives, but we also need to, factor in the human psychology, that it's people executing the skills in the business to that very strategic vision, but also the CEO is human. The CEO, I think it was Elon Musk, it was a TED talk I'd seen, and the little snippet referred to every CEO looks at what's going wrong. They never look at what's going right, because they always want to be fixing what's going wrong, and they want to be on the front foot and be proactive in that respect. But yeah, I think from the lens of people, it's always about, making sure that everyone has what they need to get the task done. And if we're focusing on that strategic priority that you had set, why is it that we're going in this direction, and hold their hand through that journey. So behind the scenes, there's lots of conversations that happen for the leaders to then show up and carry on and do great work. So yes, being in a people and culture role, I know that very well. So the next question I have is really to do with the very reason why we're here, mastering influence. So how have you gone about building that influence in the C-suite yourselves? Like, what's your cheat code? In other words, do you have any tips?
I have one tip, and this is to keep it as simple as possible. Do what you're asked at times, and just do what you say you're going to do. It's really simple, and it applies across all levels, but I've found it to be the thing that works the best, whether you're tasked with something simple or something complicated, or you've committed to deliver on something. Just do it in the time frame that you say you're going to do it in. And if there's a problem or if there's a challenge, flag it early. Don't sit on it and try and solve the problem yourself. Engage and go, something's come up. This is going to take more time, or X factor has come into this and it's changed the dynamic. But, time and time again, where I see people fall over, it's because they're trying to make excuses sometimes for something they haven't done or haven't delivered on. But, from my experience, I've found that you earn respect and you earn credibility, and then the ability to then influence when you need to influence on something bigger, by having already built up some pedigree in just delivering on what you say you're going to deliver on. That's it. That's as simple. I try and not overcomplicate it any more than that.
That's the cheat code. Great capture. I really like the essence of what you've said there. Now, Jess, what have you got in terms of your advice, your tip, your cheat code?
If Andy's advice applied, there'd be half the amount of people roles out there because we love the amount of issues to solve for. If we right. Yeah. Mine is probably just more so making sure that you really understand broader business context, so that you're not just the people person. And I think it's an absolute requirement of people leaders that they have a really strong commercial acumen. So, I always find myself leaning into broader business conversations, whether that's around business operations, whether it's around growth, whether it's around commercial, to really understand and partner with that executive. As a people leader, a strong relationship between an executive and a people leader can be an absolute powerhouse dynamic. It's someone who they trust, someone who they feel can maintain that organizational wide view, that safe space to sort of talk about the things that they might be struggling with. And if you can then meet them and have those broader business conversations, where if they want to download with you about a sales strategy or a challenge they've got within an operations function, and I'm not saying that you have to be a domain expert, but to be able to just hold your own in that conversation and bounce back and forth with some really strong commercial acumen, I think just makes you a really well-rounded professional who can then bring it back to people, which, as we know, is still the core capability of most businesses. No matter what the actual end output is, whether it's product or service, it's still powered by the humans behind the scenes. So I think that being able to pair those two things makes life a lot more enjoyable, but also makes you more impactful as well.
Okay. I have a curveball question yet again, and this off the back of both how you both answered this. If you reflect now on self, say you're going through the experience and you're, using those cheat codes to master the influence of the CEO or people in the C-suite, what is it that you do to prepare for those conversations from, perspective of your mindset? Because, if you're not feeling well, and if you don't feel comfortable or confident, if you're feeling like you're not heard, chances are you're not going to show up and influence these individuals. So what do you do from a personal perspective? What's your personal cheat code, if you like, in terms of perhaps your mindset or the human psychology, like the place that you need to be to show up being the best version of you, to have that robust conversation? Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? You're not always the best version of yourself. And there have been times and moments in my life when I've gone into meetings, and I felt exceptionally prepared, right? I might have felt like I've done my homework, I've done my research, I've got a good night's sleep, I'm in a good place, and something hasn't gone to plan in that meeting. And sometimes you think about, hey, why? What was wrong? And then there's been other occasions where, I've had a terrible night's sleep, I've got a baby that's kept me awake for, hours on end, and then you sort of roll into this meeting and you look at yourself and you go, I don't look very good and I don't feel good, but you still perform sometimes and you still deliver. And there isn't necessarily a cheat code as such for that, but I think regardless, preparation is important in anything. So if you do roll into something and you're tired, you've not had a good day or a good week or whatever it may be, as long as you've done the preparation work, that's what you fall back on, that's what you rely on. So you might not be in the perfect headspace, because let's be honest, who is all the time? No one is. We'd be lying to ourselves if we were. But at least if you've been able to do some of that preparation around whatever you need to do, that is your fallback, and you can rely and trust on that. And also just remember that you're not necessarily always alone either. You don't have to just rely on yourself. Make sure you have supportive people around you and build a culture within your own team, where if you're struggling, you can lean on someone else as well. You can ask other people for help. So being vulnerable is often a good thing. Excellent.
That's great. I've got some insights into Andy, how you work, and set yourself up for the day. Fantastic. Really good advice. And Jess, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think as an extension to what Andy spoke about, and in terms of being prepared, you need to be prepared to the minute before you step into that conversation. Because if you're talking particularly to a CEO, they're obviously at the coalface of, the whatever is going on in terms of what's most critical for the business at any one time. And so it is really, if you're super organized and you've been prepped for a meeting and it's on Thursday, and you allocate some time on Monday to get your thinking together, but you don't know that something really major has happened on Tuesday afternoon, and then you walk in and, to be able to just empathize and understand with whatever is front of their mind, and to be able to keep up in that conversation is really important. So in the context of our work, I'm not necessarily across what is going on all the time with every client up to the minute, but I know that if I'm walking into a conversation or touching base with one of our C-suite clients, I'm going to touch base with my team and say, what's going on? What might come up in that conversation that I need to be aware of? So the classic, not just rolling in from one meeting to the next and going, I haven't done my due diligence, because it's embarrassing if you get on the phone with that person, did you hear about, this thing? It's really stressing me out. And you don't even know what they're talking about because you're not across the details. So I think just as an extension, just remembering how up to date an executive typically will be, and making sure that you're matching that. And the only other thing from personal experience that I would say is just backing yourself, that you have a right to be in that conversation and that you've got value to add, and not letting that good old imposter syndrome sort of get the better of you. I used to say for years and years, I know I'm not really qualified to say, or I know I might not have all the information about that department, and it just completely devalues whatever you're about to say next. So I think remembering that if they're choosing to engage with you, they see value in the interaction, and then it's your responsibility to sort of make the most of it. So, the good old adage of, earning a seat at the table, we have that seat. We don't need to spend any more time doubting if we're meant to be there or not.
So true. Give yourself permission to be at that table in the first place and share your voice and perspectives.
Yeah.
This is really wonderful. So essentially, if I was to summarize, all the things that you've mentioned in terms of building those better business partnerships and creating that impact and lasting influence is know your audience, have that effective communication versus that, know how they want to receive that information. Is it data specific? If it is data specific, what data matters to them? Have in mind that we're dealing with people. So people, skills, feelings also comes into play. And that's why the role of a people leader is really important, to make sure that strategic vision is kept on track. And in terms of the strategic vision, going back to influence, it's got to be versus what's going on in the marketplace. What are we doing in the posture of the business? Have we lost talent? Have we not? So all of that, I might have missed some things. So I'm now going to pass it to you both to tell me, if you had one, if you could choose one, it could be more than one or two or 10 particular takeaways from the question that we've posed today. What's the one thing that's made the biggest difference in terms of the relationships that you have with C-suite? Yeah, that's what I want to ask both of you.
I think that seeing them as a human, get to know them, get to know their kids' names and what they like to do on the weekends, like break down the barrier from the get-go and just go in and ask them something about themselves, because most people forget to actually do that. And to be able to just, walk in and really just bring down that guard that some people have sometimes by asking them, how it is with their kids getting back to school, or how their cycle into work was, or, what the weather's like where they are, if they're going anywhere. It's just, once again, keeping that human component front of mind, I think is really, really important. And once again, I think a lot of people just don't feel like they have the permission or the ability to do that. So that is one of the key ways to build rapport. Then the only other thing I would say is just keep it simple, keep it relevant, and keep it valuable. And if you do those two things, I think it really helps to, set a very strong foundation for a great working relationship.
Yeah, I'm gonna just cheat and say almost exactly the same thing, to be honest with you, because it is what works. I think when I was very junior in my career, and sort of you get some basic sales training and you learn about elevator pitch, right? You got 45 minutes with your client or executive, 45 seconds. So what are you going to say? What are you going to talk about? And you go through all this sales training, and I kind of smile and laugh about it now, because there are some aspects about the way that you build rapport that is valid in that sort of idea and that sort of training. But like Jess has said, I'm a human and that person is a human, so let's connect on a human level. You can't build relationships by just living in this spaceship that is corporate world, right? Because everyone goes home and kicks off their work shoes and puts on their slippers at night and feeds their dog or talks to their kids or whatever it may be. Like there are certain things that sit behind our working life. And when you're in an executive role, you're probably having conversations all day about work stuff. And sometimes you just maybe want to have a quick, 2-minute conversation about something not related to work. And that can be a bit of a breakup in an executive's day that helps them relax as well. And sometimes that's important if you're wanting to get a message across, or if you're wanting to break down a barrier. And then, again, that point around keeping it simple, and just, if you're asked to do something, just do it. If you can't do it, say why. Support of people around you. You're not an island to yourself. As a people leader, you are sometimes a figurehead, and you are expected to be at the forefront of things. But there are people supporting you and with you, and bring them with you along the way as well, because you also don't just want to hog that executive relationship. You've got to think about other people that can add value to that. So if you don't have the backing and support of your team, then you're only going to last so long.
Yes, the essence of being human. What wonderful advice you've both given there. And now we're going to move to the question time. I haven't seen any specific ones come through, but there is some interaction going on there. But I have a question to pose, of course, for both of you. Now, Jess, you specifically are in the role of CEO yourself. And so my question is related to that. You literally understand what Andy mentioned. You understand, and also what you've mentioned, the role of the CEO, be empathetic. We are human. What is the one thing that keeps you up at night as CEO?
I I don't sleep very well, so there could be many reasons. My 5-year-old's got something to do with that. But on the work front, I feel an immense responsibility. I feel a huge responsibility to my team more than anything. You know, I've gone out there and told them, hey, there's this business, and you know, we're capable of doing X, Y, and Z, and I want you to sign up and trust me to give you a safe and stable and enjoyable work, you know, experience to be a part of. So I feel a huge responsibility for that. I think when you're a CEO, and particularly if you're a founder as well, you and your identity is completely tied up in the business. So no matter what happens, good or bad, I feel personally responsible and, you know, take a lot of pride in what we do. So if I know that something's not going to plan with a client or with an employee and someone's not having a good time, it makes me worry. So I think some of my team might be watching and they're probably all laughing because there's definitely like the twice monthly worry freak out cycle that comes from me. And that's just as a business owner who's still trying to figure out the trends and the cyclical nature of business. And as Andy said before, there's a lot of external forces which feel scary. But that's just where you have to really get confident on what you're great at and double down on it and not get overly ambitious or irresponsible in your decision making to make sure that you grow something that's sustainable and that you can stand by what you believe. So yeah, so look, I think there's plenty that keeps me up at night, but no more so than the fact I'm just responsible for, you know, most importantly my team, but also our clients as well.
Thank you for answering that, Jess. And yeah, what a wonderful CEO you are. I'll leave it at that. Andy, I have a question for you, and then we do have a question in the audience that I'm going to bring to life. So Andy, in your role as head of TA, you know, thinking about from the perspective of you obviously have a team that you manage versus that influence that you're having to master with your C-suite, what's the one thing that keeps you up at night?
Yeah, well, again, children, and yeah, but there's not one thing, to be honest with you. It changes almost weekly, you know, and I do my best to sort of try and leave my problems at the door and not let them keep me awake at night. But of course, things do always happen. For me, it's not so much about the things that you can't control. It's what is going to be in my control tomorrow that I need to think about. And sometimes, yes, I do sit there lying awake at night thinking, right, I've got this important meeting coming up, or I've got this critical task that needs to be completed in the next 24, 48 hours. I think the things that keep me up at night are more those kind of short-term controllable factors rather than some of those bigger picture, longer-term factors. And when we use the expression keep me up at night, I'm not often lying awake thinking about them because you know, you try to, you know, I think personally, and for my headspace and my own mental well-being, and I think COVID taught us a lot about this, to be honest with you, is that just focus on what's within your scope of control and what's in your ability to do something about. You cannot sometimes control global macroeconomic factors. You cannot control what's happening out in the world that contributes to some bigger picture decisions that might be getting made. Yeah, they can be stressful and they can be worrying and they can have an impact on your life or your role or your day-to-day or whatever it may be, but you can't control them. So, you know, take a breath, take a step back, and just focus on, Jess mentioned it before about something related earlier, bite-sized chunks. Break things down into things that are smaller and more manageable. It's the advice that I was given when I was a student and thinking, oh, I've got all these exams to revise for. Where do I even start? Break things down into smaller bite-sized pieces. And then you find that you can digest them easier, but then you can also sleep better at night as well.
Thank you for answering that question and giving some insights, you know, into you know, the question I asked is cheeky, you know, what keeps you up at night, meaning what problem are you solving today, and that's on your mind. Now I do have a question. I'm going to see if I can share it here, if I could bring it up. So either of you, both of you can answer this. Either of you can go first. So if your CEO is going on gut feel and doesn't value the data you're presenting, in fact is rejecting it, what would you recommend to influence in that situation?
I can jump in on this one. I think this is something that comes up quite a lot. And, you know, the first thing I would say is that often their gut feel is correct. And so I think you really have to, time and time again, in my own career where I've sort of gone up against a CEO's gut feel, more often than not, it has ended up. Now, I don't know whether it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, whereby once the CEO's made a decision on what they perceive about something, no matter what you do, that becomes the reality. And that could be, but that's the reality of the influence of that role. And so, when that occurs, I think it's about remaining really open and not being too attached to what you were putting forward, to really listen to their perspective and, be curious to see if actually you can firstly get on board with their thinking and their idea, but assuming that there is just sort of not an agree to disagree, but just a meeting in the middle somewhat. I would challenge you to say, okay, how can you create some form of measurement on the gut feel? So if you're saying to your leader, I think that we need to invest in these 5 people because they're key talent. And then they say, look, actually, no, I think it's these 3 people over here. And that's my gut feel. And I'm not going to take the data that you're presenting as to why these 5 are key, putting some measures in place. Okay, so how can we start to tell if what we're about to do to invest in these people is going to pay off, and try to pull that data in again? How can I get some stakeholder feedback? What would be some engagement data I can pull in? Have we seen a lift in performance? And trying to bring that time horizon down, because typically the CEO will make a judgment call and then move on to the next thing. They're not necessarily going to come back and be really wedded to the outcome and the sort of the specific measurement of a gut feel call they've made at the time. So I think it would be those 2 things. One, being really curious and open to working in partnership with them to work out what the right way forward is, but then assuming that you do need to work with the gut feel. And even if you disagree with the gut feel, put some form of measurement in place so that you can come back and have a really robust conversation if it doesn't go the way that they intended, and bring them back to, remember how we made this call, we did it, this is what's occurred as a result, now I'd like to try X. But without that really clear and succinct way of articulating, especially if you're pushing back, it's just a battle you're not often going to win.
Yeah.
Great.
And decisions are not, just a point in time and then that's it. The impact of a decision can go on for months and years sometimes. So, I think Jess is spot on in that, if a decision is made that perhaps you disagree with, or it's data that you presented has been rejected and things go in another direction, sometimes that's what happens. And I think if you've got the relationship and if you're comfortable to, there's no issue with saying, look, I disagree with what we're doing. However, you have to afford your CEO sometimes a degree of respect, because the reason they're often in that position in the first place is because their gut feel has been right more often than not. And so therefore they've been rewarded in their career to allow them to make some of those decisions, right? But CEOs are not unaccountable. They're accountable to the organizations and the people they work for. They're accountable to other executives. They're accountable to boards. They're accountable to stakeholders and shareholders. So, often, I would say in many cases, to Michael's question, it does depend on what is the gut feel, what is the matter, what is the topic, because your action can sometimes then vary depending on what that is. So if it's a gut feel that you think has some sort of ethical or moral dilemma, then you might need to go and seek advice elsewhere or something like that. But if it's something that you think is a business decision that goes down one pathway rather than another, that both could have potentially possible outcomes, then sometimes you need to accept that your data has not been taken into or not been agreed upon with that decision, but you still have to get behind the direction that the business goes in.
Yeah, that's wonderful and insightful. Hopefully, Michael, you've got what you needed to out of that. I'm pretty sure you have. Now, I have an additional question I want to ask you, and I'm moving on because James has asked this. Let's see. One of Andy's earlier hacks was to just do what you're asked. What if the business is providing very little guidance or asking for nothing more than your team is already doing? And the follow-up question to that, what if the ability to influence is limited by HR or TA not having the essential seat at the table? Ooh. Great question. Thanks, James.
Given it was directed to something that I mentioned earlier, I'll kick off there because it's important. But if you're being provided little guidance or they're not asking you for anything, then that can be difficult, because then you feel like you're just sort of paddling along in the deep end, and where's your direction? So it's important to try and then go and be proactive, and it doesn't always need to be. We've spoken a lot about the CEO as a key person here, but remember, there's a suite often of executives and senior people and business leaders that you can go and seek guidance from around the direction you need to be going in, or where you can be going to add value. So it's important to not be passive in those situations, and sort of understand, okay, what more can we be doing? Where else can we add value? But I have often sat in meetings and I've asked managers and bosses and senior leaders to go, is there anything else I can be doing? And they're like, no, just carry on, do what you're doing. And that can sometimes be a little bit disheartening, because you're like, I wanted to be given some direction. I wanted to be given, a job or a task or a direction to go down. But sometimes that's when you need to go and sort of take a bit more of a proactive approach to kind of seek out what is valuable yourself, because someone might not have told you what that is, but there is still some value somewhere that you can be adding.
Yeah.
Yes, being on the front foot, being proactive with that. I think that's the essence of what you're saying. So I think that's pretty much it in terms of the questions from the audience. They were very, very challenging questions to answer, that's for sure. Great answers and insights that you've both given. I have really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. What I wanted to ask of the audience is to share, what's a key takeaway you've taken out of today, if you don't mind, giving that a go. That would be wonderful. I think we've had a response from James. I just want to, there we go. Before I close out for the session, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jess and Andy, for your time. Finding out more about you, what matters to you, how you master that influence, giving some insights and intel and cheat codes to others to understand how they too can go back to the business and start mastering the influence as well. So without further ado, I just wanted to ask, if people wanted to find you, connect with you, where do you hang out? Where do you network? Where can they reach you so they can carry on the conversations with you?
Local library I spend a lot of time at.
Yeah.
But, LinkedIn certainly, the often the one-stop shop for networking connectivity. So be great to have any further conversations with anyone who's watching or listening. Connect via LinkedIn. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And same as well, LinkedIn. I'm based in Melbourne. Our team's in Melbourne, and love the opportunity to sort of meet up with people and have those conversations. And just, if we can offer something, some insight or some guidance to someone to be more impactful in their role, I think that is always a beneficial experience for anyone who's involved in that conversation. So LinkedIn. We've got a website, but who checks websites anymore? And absolutely would welcome continuing the conversation with anyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to both of you. I've really enjoyed it. And we have ongoing sessions with Strivent, so hopefully both of you can also attend and make your contributions. You've got wonderful things to share. And I look forward to getting to know both of you as we carry on. Jess, I'll definitely connect with you because I'm Melbourne-based. Mm-hmm. And Andy, you're Sydney?
No, Melbourne too.
You're Melbourne as well. Wow, we might as well do a catch-up. You did say it at the very beginning. So without further ado, thank you so much. And over and out for today. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Joe.
You.